Welcome to the debate. Our source material today presents a profoundly assertive claim that the relationship you have with yourself, what it calls self-love, is the single most important relationship of your life. It's positioned as the fundamental driver of confidence, success, and even happiness.
And it's not just, motivational advice. It's framed as this neurologically and psychologically backed necessity.
Exactly. So the core question for us is really about the primacy of that internal relationship. Is self-love the necessary foundational precursor that drives success and a healthy life? Or is its effectiveness, maybe secondary to or just conflated with skilled external behavior and relational mastery? I'll be making the case for the foundational primacy of self-love, arguing that this internal state is the prerequisite that makes all effective external action truly possible.
And I'm going to challenge that singular foundational status. I'll argue that the success we're talking about is actually the measurable result of mastering specific, conscious, and learned behavioral skills. The power, I believe, is in the action, not the abstract feeling.
Okay, so my position is that the internal relationship is, to quote the text, the internal foundation that determines everything else. And we just can't afford to ignore the statistics here. Over 85% of people struggle with low self-esteem. This internal rejection of the self it's the hidden epidemic that precedes and causes all the external failures, the missed opportunities, and that persistent pattern of just settling for less. The source is unequivocal. The inner structure is flawed, and that has to be fixed first. And this is because self-criticism is not benign. The neuroscience here is fascinating. It shows that internal rejection isn't just a bad mood. It's a biological necessity for optimal brain function. When we criticize ourselves, we activate the same brain regions that respond to actual physical pain. This triggers a chronic stress response, a sustained cortisol spike, which literally shuts down the prefrontal cortex. That's the part of the brain for creativity, strategic planning, emotional regulation. If your brain is constantly fighting an internal threat, success becomes physiologically impossible.
Right.
So when this internal relationship is healthy, it creates an internal locus of control. And this shift is described as one of the strongest predictors of achievement in every area of life. When you operate from a place of fundamental worth, you make decisions from strength, from your values, not from a desperate fear of judgment. This self-love, this internal security, is the only real antidote to what the source calls an inherently unstable and unreliable addiction to external validation. That security has to be there first.
Okay, I acknowledge the profound negative impact of self-criticism. I get it. And the importance of a stable internal world. But I think we have to really re-examine how self-love is being defined throughout the source material. It often defines self-love not as some spontaneous feeling, but by its outcomes and the skills you need to get those outcomes. It's these specific, externalized behaviors that are really driving success, not some generalized, abstract state of love.
Look at the framework it presents, the self-love foundation system. It relies on 4 pillars: self-awareness, self-acceptance, self-compassion, and self-care. The material explicitly frames these not as static beliefs, but as 4 learned conscious skills. The actual transformation, the neuroplastic change we both agree on, it comes from actively applying techniques. For instance, the RAIN technique. That's a structured cognitive skill, not just a feeling. You're acting your way into self-love, not just thinking your way into it.
But the acting has to come from somewhere.
Well, let me finish. The material also links self-love to success by noting that achievement requires persistence through inevitable setbacks. This persistence, it's a function of discipline, of external commitment to your goals. This suggests to me that the process we're calling self-love is inseparable from, and maybe even comes after, the active, sometimes painful pursuit of external action. You don't just magically feel worthy and then get the discipline. You apply the discipline, and through that repeated act, you reinforce your sense of worth.
Let's focus on the central problem, though, that hidden epidemic. 85% of people struggling with self-rejection. We agree on the number. My point is that this internal conflict, this deep conviction of being unworthy, is the root cause that dictates behavior. I mean, why do people struggle to set boundaries? It's because they fear losing connection or approval, which stems from a deeper belief that their worth is conditional on pleasing other people.
I see the connection, but I'm questioning the causal direction.
Well, the distinction I'm making is fundamental. Action driven by proving your worth is brittle. It's exhausting. It will eventually fail. Action driven by expressing your inherent worth is resilient and, frankly, magnetic. You cannot sustain the diligence it takes to set a boundary, which is incredibly uncomfortable, if on a deeper level you believe you are unworthy of that boundary being respected. That internal trauma, what the text calls the authentic self-wound, has to be addressed first. Otherwise, the skills you're talking about just become more tools to try and earn love, not express it.
Okay, that's a powerful point, but have you considered that this statistic on low self-esteem might just be describing a symptom of inadequate emotional skills, rather than the primary cause? If the problem shows up as an inability to advocate for yourself, then the most effective intervention should be learning that advocacy, the practical, immediate skill of saying no when you want to say no. Think about the feedback loop. You feel unworthy because your lack of boundaries allows others to override your needs. That feeling of unworthiness is the emotional confirmation of a behavioral failure. So if you successfully practice the skill of setting a boundary and you survive the tension, your brain registers that success, it lowers the cortisol, and it provides real evidence that you're worthy of respect. So addressing the behavior seems like the more actionable route to generating the state you're championing.
But that's where the neuroscience comes back in my favor, I think.
I actually think my interpretation of the neuroscientific evidence leads me elsewhere. You're right. The material provides detailed findings, increased heart rate variability, reduced cortisol, increased thickness in the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC. We know the ACC is critical for cognitive control and emotional processing. But these changes are directly linked to specific repeatable practices, like self-compassion meditation. This suggests the change is driven by strengthening neural pathways through conscious action. The self-compassion break is a deliberate, multi-step cognitive effort. If we can prove that applying a skill physically restructures the brain, then the skill is demonstrably the primary driver. The feeling of self-love is the desired state that follows the training. The effort precedes the outcome.
I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning, because the practices, as effective as they are only transformative when they're rooted in the proper intention. The source defines this intention as treating yourself with the same kindness you would show a good friend. Without recognizing self-love as the overarching goal, the belief in your inherent worth, these practices risk becoming just another form of forced positivity. Or worse, another performance metric you can fail at, right? The neuroplasticity relies on consistently choosing self-compassion over self-criticism. That choice requires an underlying conviction in your own worth. If I still fundamentally believe I'm flawed, practicing a self-compassion break just feels inauthentic. It feels like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone. The unconditional acceptance has to provide the safety for the skill to be applied truthfully.
But that introduces a catch-22, doesn't it? How do you generate that unconditional acceptance without first performing the actions that challenge the ingrained critical belief system? The critical voice is deeply programmed. The most effective way to reprogram the brain isn't through abstract declaration, but by generating new corrective emotional experiences. By practicing the skill of self-compassion during a setback, you are actively choosing a new response. It's the physical, repetitive act of training the ACC that strengthens the neural pathway for self-control. The skill, by its successful application, generates the proof of worthiness, which then stabilizes the internal state. The two are interwoven, I'll grant you that, but the skill is the mechanism of change. That makes it primary.
Okay, let's turn to the self-love success formula, because I think it resolves this. Self-love allows for clarity of values and makes you magnetic. This happens because your internal sense of worth becomes unshakable, and the real power here is resilience. Failures are viewed as learning experiences, not as evidence of personal inadequacy. This unshakable core allows for authentic, sustained persistence. When you suffer a major setback, the person operating from self-rejection internalizes it as, I am a failure. The person operating from self-love can perform the skill of emotional regulation because their internal security isn't jeopardized by an external event. The foundation is what grants the courage to engage in the risky, skillful actions you're describing.
That's an interesting point, but I would frame it differently, especially regarding that success formula. The source says the shift allows you to appreciate recognition without needing it. Yet success in a career, promotions, leadership, and in relationships, that is by definition relational and validated externally. We can't escape the need for external feedback. So is it possible the healthiest state isn't pure internal insulation, but a strong internal base that allows for effective and resilient engagement with external performance? The world still requires you to take calculated risks. The self-love model is only effective if the individual can execute complex behaviors in the face of that necessary external stress. I still maintain that resilience is the result of a perfected skill, not the automatic outcome of an internal state.
And this takes us full circle, highlighting our primary disagreement on the direction of causation. I still maintain that the internal relationship is the template for all external life. True self-love, rooted in unconditional acceptance, literally rewires the brain. It makes success and genuine connection biologically possible. It is the necessary foundation for sustained achievement, ensuring we pursue what fulfills us, not just what impresses others.
I'm sorry, I just can't get there. I don't buy that this general abstract state of self-love is the single primary cure. While internal acceptance is undeniably important, the true demonstrable power in the material lies in the skills, the self-compassion practices, the boundary setting, the emotional mastery, which actively transform the internal landscape and drive effective external action. Self-worth is generated and maintained through diligent practice. This suggests self-love as an ongoing, skillful process, not a static foundation that just guarantees results.
We both agree that transformation requires moving from self-rejection to self-acceptance. My assertion is that the initial choice of unconditional acceptance is the prerequisite decision that unlocks the power of those skills.
And mine is that the process of repair is defined by the diligent application of skillful, measurable action, turning that powerful intention into tangible behavioral practices that create real neurochemical change.
This discussion, I think, really reveals the profound complexity of personal transformation. It highlights that critical, intertwined connection between our internal mental landscape, our neuroscience, our childhood programming, and our external behaviors.
Indeed. The path forward seems to require both that commitment to internal acceptance and the diligent application of skillful action. Understanding that self-love is both the goal and the process seems essential for that lifelong journey of building an unbreakable relationship with oneself. Clearly, there's much more to explore here.